Well, we as a church are going to be spending the next few weeks in Luke chapter 15 talking about the parable of the prodigal son, and it's such a rich parable. I have been really helped in looking at this parable, just understanding grace, understanding the way God wants to minister as believers so that we would know him, but also in how we as are trying to share this gospel with our community. What does that look like? And this parable is so insightful as to what that looks like. And so I really look forward to our time together in this as a church, as believers, seeing what God has for us. So we will have a few weeks together in Luke 15. So thankfully, I don't have to cover the whole thing today. But I did want to read it to you so you could kind of catch what we're talking about. And specifically, Luke 15, if you want something to read during your quiet time devotionals this week, I would encourage you to read Luke 15. It'll just kind of refresh in your heart some of the messages of grace, as well as, hopefully prepare as we have more weeks together in this passage. But today we want to talk about the two groups of people that were gathered around Jesus at the telling of this parable. So what we see is in verses 1 and 2, it says that the tax collectors and sinners were gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So you can see in these first two verses of Luke 15, two groups of people that were gathering around Jesus, the tax collectors and sinners, and then the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. The tax collectors and sinners were drawing near to Jesus, and the Pharisees were standing back and even upset about, what was going on, the fact that these tax collectors were drawing near. Jesus is going to take these two groups, and when he tells the parable of the prodigal son, he's going to actually direct his message to these two groups of people. First, to the tax collectors represented in the parable as the younger brother, and then the Pharisees also identified in the parable as the older brother. And so I want for us to kind of think about this, because Jesus is going to speak directly to this older brother, younger brother dynamic. And what really just kind of had this on my heart was how incredibly direct this passage speaks to where we are, our current cultural moment in 2021. I mean, think about what's going on here. You have the Pharisees, who are the older brother, who are pushing back against the tax collectors, the younger brother. So the older, more responsible brother is pushing back against the reckless younger brother, the more reckless younger generation, pushed back against by the older, more responsible generation. So what does that look like in 2021? How do we see this playing out for us? New York Times columnist Russ Dowett, he wrote specifically about this shift, and he says this about the moment, the cultural moment we live in. He says, in the future, it seems there will only be one ism, individualism, and its rule will never end. As for religion, it shall decline. As for marriage, it shall be postponed. As for ideologies, they shall be rejected. As for patriotism, it shall be abandoned. As for strangers, they shall be distrusted. Only pot, selfies, and Facebook will abide, and the greatest of these will probably be Facebook. So I don't know if you caught his kind of poetic license he took there, kind of the 1 Corinthians 13 love chapter where Paul says, only faith, hope, and love remain, and the greatest of these is love. So he's kind of taking a little, little liberties with this passage. And depending on which side you sit on, you may find that, true and encouraging, or maybe a little distressing for kind of where we stand as a society in 2021. And the thing that you see here, individualism, what he's pointing out to us is that this idea of individualism, the idea that the individual has the right to decide for themselves what they going to be, who I'm made to be, what I'm going to be, go after my dreams, and even to the point of I get to decide what's true for me. You can decide what's true for you. I get to decide what's true for me. And oh, by the way, I'm not going to tell you what's true for you, and I don't want you to tell me what's true for me, because I have the individual autonomy to decide what's true for myself. But as this individual rises in America, institutions fall. So the term I want to kind of introduce to you is this big, fat, ugly word, anti-institutionalism. This is a big word that basically communicates to us the fact that you have institutions that are seen as they're no longer trusted anymore. So institutions would represent things like nationalism, patriotism, marriage, family, the church. These would all be the kind of institutions that we think about as building blocks for society, cornerstones of how we do what we do as a society. And progressively, as we've kind of reached where we are as a nation in the cultural moment that we're in, we've slowly come to distrust those institutions. We've come to say that they are perhaps misleading, maybe not something that we want to put the same kind of trust in that maybe we did many years ago in our country. For example, a few of the examples he kind of called out in his little quip. First, patriotism. So do you remember a couple of years ago when there was the beginnings of, I wouldn't say it's over, but the beginnings of the whole controversy around kneeling during the national anthem? You remember when all of that started? So what the beginning of that was this National Football League game that was going on. Colin Kaepernick, quarterback in the NFL, he took a knee while everyone else was standing for the national anthem. And the whole issue around kneeling was that things were going on in our country that were, vestiges of institutional power that were seen as being abused by those in power. And therefore, collectively, the decision was made that we don't subscribe to, support, trust these institutions anymore the way we used to. And we're going to communicate that. We're going to make that known. Another institution, marriage. So consider these statistics around Americans' perspective towards marriage. The marriage rate for baby boomers, which would be like my parents, were 91%, meaning the people that actually got married, that would be 91% of them got married. For Gen X, 82%. And then for millennials, the current generation, that rate has dropped all the way to 70%, which is the highest unmarried rate in modern history. And even the ones that do get married, they are delaying when they get married. The median age of when a man would be married was age 23 in 1960. That was a few years ago. To today, it is up to age 29. So even if you actually do get married, you're getting married later. And, kind of a little bit of the thinking that's going on in kind of American culture is, you hear it in this quote from actress and comedian Sarah Silverman. She tweeted this: "Why would I want the government involved in my love life? Ew, it's barbaric." So that's kind of the attitude that's going on in terms of what is our perspective towards the institution of marriage. And in what's being said here is that in this cultural moment, I want to be able to make my own path. I want to make my own way. And I don't want to be told what to do. It's not that these, in today's America, that people don't have boyfriends and girlfriends and relationships. That's still the case. But now they don't trust the institution of marriage anymore. At least not like they used to. Okay, finally, last institution, very hard-hit institution. And this is one that all of us gathered and all of us gathering together even online. Very important, very dear to us, the institution of the church. So in the church, the Pew Research Group had this chart of kind of generational participation in in church affiliation. And so what you can see here, I know it's a little small. Sorry for you online folks. My apologies. Hopefully you can kind of make out some of this. But the idea is that back in earlier generations like the baby boomers, you would have seen only 17% not affiliated with some Christian church denomination. So the lion's share of people had some denominational affiliation, some kind of Christian church, whether it be mainline, Protestant, there's something that people have, made part of their life. But now, as of in the millennials, you can see here that rate has increased. 36% of now the current generation in America is unaffiliated. This is the group called the nuns. They would, when you give them their little survey to ask about religious affiliation, their religious affiliation is none. It's not Protestant, Catholic, evangelical, whatever. Like there's no affiliation with the institutional church like there was before. And Donald Miller, he is a professor. He kind of unpacks this a little bit in the terminology we're using today. He says, old institutional forms are not resonating with millennial postmodern mentality. So the idea basically is that this institution of the church, it doesn't have the same position in people's lives like it used to have. And so what I want you to see, kind of like the same with marriage, it's not that people are all atheists, and it's not that people have just completely disregarded some kind of spirituality, but what they're saying is, don't tell me I got to be a part of a church in order to do those things. Don't tell me that to be a good person, to be a spiritual person, I've got to go to this institution called the church. And that is because, just like marriage and patriotism, just like nationalism, all of these things, also the church is now an institution that we don't trust like we used to. So what does Luke 15 teach us about this dynamic of the gospel on the older brother and the younger brother? Let's look at that. First, let's talk about the younger brother in Jesus' parable. So here's what Jesus has to say about the younger brother. While he was still a long way off, the father saw, long way off, the father said, give me a share. The younger son said to him, Father, give me a share of the property that's coming to me. And he divided the property between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took it on a journey to a far country. And there squandered his property in reckless living. So this younger brother, the picture that you see here is the younger brother taking his inheritance and then leaving his family. And so if you were to kind of think about that in our terminology, he's leaving that institution to go kind of find himself. I'm going to go make my own way, right? That's kind of the language we're using here. And the idea here, the terminology that Tim Keller uses in his book, Prodigal God, which is a book I highly recommend. It's one that I have found very helpful in kind of understanding Luke 15 and this whole dynamic around the parable of the prodigal son. Tim Keller uses the term self-discovery as this is the path of life for the younger brothers, those that are kind of in this description. And he says this, the paradigm holds that individuals must be free to pursue their own goals and self-actualization regardless of custom or convention. So even if there are cultural requirements that you feel like are institutionally being put on you, those younger brothers, if you will, are saying, I got to be me. I got to go do what I do. Think of Romeo and Juliet. Romeo has to pursue love. Even if it's against what his family is requiring of him, he has to follow his heart and pursue the love of his life, Juliet, even if all around him say, this is not allowed, this is forbidden love. Or maybe a little bit more modern, the Little Mermaid. So the Little Mermaid was made, she wants to follow her heart, and she wants to live on the land. But she was made to live under the sea, right? Under the sea. No go, Micah. Under the sea. It's the little lobster singing that, under the sea. Okay, I got to move on. So she wants to pursue, I want to be me. I want to live on land. Even if it's against my father's wishes, I'm going to pursue my dreams. So this is the younger brother, self-discovery, find my own way. And this is the rising wave of the cultural moment we are in America today. It's discover your own path. It's stay true to myself. And even if it's at the expense of an institution like family, younger brother leaves home, family disregarded, even if at the expense of an institution like the family or the church, leave the church, I have to go after being me. I got to be that individual that I'm going to pursue my dreams. Okay, now let's talk about the older brother for a few minutes. The older brother, Jesus describes in the parable this way. He says, now the older son was in the field, and he came and drew near to the house. And he called to one of the servants and asked them what these things meant. And he said, your brother has come home, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he's received him back safe and sound. But he, the older brother, was angry and refused to go in. So the Pharisees in the parable are the ones tagged by Jesus as the older brother. They're the ones represented as in the parable as the older brother. And Tim Keller describes those in his book, Prodigal God. He says those are the ones that believe receiving salvation is through strict obedience to the Bible. And they believe in putting the standards of the community ahead of their individual fulfillment. And so, if you are an older brother, you do what's expected of you. You have this requirement that almost won't let you not follow, that just in your heart it tells you, I have to have this kind of moral conformity that I know is supposed to be. And it's what I'm going to do. It's how I'm going to build my life. And whether my life is successful or not has to do with how well my heart says that I have, in fact, fulfilled what honor looks like, what family looks like, what is, some of these things that we think about as requirements, they're going to be followed. And that doesn't just mean Christian. That could just be anyone in life that just says, I want to do the right thing. I want to follow what's expected of me. A classic example of this would be from the life of the famous composer Mozart. So in Mozart's life, there was a rival who was exceedingly jealous of the prodigious musical gifts that Mozart had. His name was Salieri. So Salieri, seeing the gifts that Mozart had, worked harder and harder at his musical craft. He wanted to get better. He wanted to surpass Mozart. And he even said, I'm going to give my gifts to God, and I'm going to devote myself to God. And if God will bless me, I want to keep working harder and harder so that I can be the greatest musician, even greater than this musician Mozart. And to make things worse, in Salieri's eyes, Mozart was this vulgar, self-indulgent, loose morals kind of a man. And so for Salieri, he is like the older brother. He is looking at this saying, I require, in my mind, if you're going to have success, you have got to work hard. You've got to have that moral conformity. These are requirements for success for both Mozart, or if you're a Pharisee looking at the tax collector, it's a requirement for the tax collectors. And if you're in Salieri's shoes, it's also what you require of God. This is what it looks like. If anyone's going to succeed, they're going to do it this way. And I'm going to require that even of God. And in coming back to the out of the parable, you look back at the scene in Luke 15, the tax collectors and the Pharisees, and what's going on here. The Pharisees are really, they're not only upset at, what's happening for the tax collectors, but they are seeing what Jesus is doing, and he is inviting them into this relationship with God that for them seems illegitimate. It's like, in their minds, the way it should work is if you are a tax collector, if you are a younger son, if you're the younger brother, and you want to get to God, you got to go through us. You have to clean up your life, do the right things, and if you're not going to do those things and follow the law of God, then you can't get to God. This is how the progression is supposed to work. And so when they look at Jesus, they're like, Jesus is offering what we probably say in our day, cheap grace. He's kind of saying to them, hey, you can get to God and skip the whole Pharisee thing and just come to me, and then you will find this relationship with God. And for them, they're looking at that and they're saying, Jesus is circumventing the system. You can't do that. This is an older brother talking. You can't do that. That's not what faith looks like in God. It has to be just like Solari. This is what it looks like. And for them, this is unacceptable, not only because in petty terms, they're not in the middle of the conversation. They're not in control. It's a little bigger than that. For them, it's because they don't believe that's how God works. And for them, this is an affront to God himself. And so they can't handle that. That's not how it works. So, which one is right? Which one does Jesus say is right? Okay, so we're going to get to the end of the parable. Jesus is going to conclude the parable. Who's the one, the younger brother or the older brother, that Jesus is gonna say, you got to be like this guy or be like this guy, or not be this guy, be this guy? What is Jesus going to hold out and offer and say this one is right? Well, before we answer that question, I want you to think about your own life. Which one are you? Are you the younger brother or the older brother? Do you tend towards this kind of self-discovery, or do you tend more to say, I'm gonna be true and be, honor the things, the traditions that I believe are right and good? And I think all of us in this room and all of us gathered together online, we all lean, maybe not fully, but we probably all lean one side or the other. You could even think about it somewhat in families. In families, sometimes the older brother, the oldest in the family, the oldest child, is typically kind of responsible, more kind of hardworking. That's sort of the typical, firstborn child sort of idea. Doesn't always hold true, but sometimes you see that play out. And then the younger child is typically a little bit more carefree, a little bit more easygoing, a little bit more, maybe you might think reckless in the eyes of the oldest. I mean, that just could be playing out. Not you, Micah. Not you, Andrew, all right? No, youngest. Okay. So, but you each of us kind of have shades of this older brother or younger brother. So, what does Jesus say? In fact, Jesus doesn't side with either. What Jesus says to the Pharisees, he rejects the idea that the Pharisees require of this moral conformity in order to come to God. What it says in the passage in Luke 15, it says, to this prodigal son, to this younger brother, here's what Jesus says the Father says to him. While he was still a long ways off, his father ran to him, felt compassion for him, embraced him, and kissed him. The Father extends grace to this prodigal son, this younger brother. It's so lavish. He doesn't wait for this younger son to clean his life up to look like a Pharisee. He also doesn't have this, requirement of, be this kind of person. He loves and extends and pursues this son. It's even before the son could even get out his repentance. You notice that God comes and embraces the son. The son hasn't even said, I'm sorry yet. This is how lavish is the love of God to that younger brother. Jesus rejects outright this idea that the Pharisees would try to say, this baggage that they would add on to the gospel and say that the path to the Father is through the grace of God that's held out by the Son. Now, Jesus is also not saying to the older brother that you have to become the younger brother. He doesn't tell the older brother that you've got to somehow adopt this tax collector, licentious, kind of sinful lifestyle in order to then come properly to God, turn into the Little Mermaid or join a biker gang. There's no here's step 1, 2, 3 to get to God. He also does not say this is what you have to do. Here's what he says to the older brother. In verse 21, it says, the father came out to plead with the older son. And he says, all that is mine is yours. The father says, I am holding out my grace to you. The older brother, I am holding out my grace out to you just like I am to the younger brother. He's not saying to the older brother, you've got to do this and then come here. And he's not saying to the younger brother, you have to come do this. He is holding out this grace to both. Now, this grace, it is so unexpected, so lavish that the people that were listening to Jesus the day that he told this parable, they were like, this can't be. It can't be like this. The prodigal had harmed his family so egregiously by him leaving with all of this property and coming back that they were like, you can't dismiss the moral requirements and live like this. And for that grace to be extended by God to those, it was like, it can't be that this is the heart of God. Unacceptable. But in fact, the ones in that cultural day, they would have seen this as so counterculture. And so it is for us today. This is such countercultural grace. In today's culture, we see this to the younger brother who, as we've kind of seen, they reject institutions, they reject the church, and they look at this kind of grace and they say, this can't be Christianity. This can't be religion at all. Or to the older brothers, in our culture, it's like they're expecting this requirement of getting cleaned up. And so for them, grace like this, it's like, that's too good to be true. That is almost, unacceptable in the way to God is to work hard. Not this message of grace. And so this grace to both brothers is this countercultural grace that God wants to extend to us. And what I want for us is that we would receive this grace, this countercultural grace for our lives, and that we would have a heart that we would want to share that with those that we want to extend the love of Christ to in our community. That as a church, that's what it would look like. That's what this grace that we extend would look like. We're not offering how to become a good religious person. We're not offering how to have the license to live some kind of hedonistic lifestyle. We are offering the gospel. This is the path to God, that we would come to know the Father through the grace extended to us in the Son.